When 17-year-old Emma Chen's homemade water purification device was laughed off the stage at the Nebraska State Science Fair by judges who dismissed it as overly simplistic farm girl engineering, she had no idea that her grandfather's mysterious notes hidden in their barn would lead to the Pentagon classifying her invention as a breakthrough in military water security technology worth $89 million in defense contracts, transforming a humiliated teenager facing college rejection into the youngest recipient of a Department of Defense Innovation Award, with federal scientists now working around the clock at her family's struggling corn farm. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know what state you're watching from in the comments, and if this story gives you chills, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got another mind-blowing story about a high school janitor who found blueprints in an old locker that turned out to be worth $45 million to NASA. At 17 years old, Emma Chen was staring at her laptop screen, displaying rejection emails from every college she had applied to, each one citing insufficient academic distinction and lack of notable achievements, as she sat in her cramped bedroom above her family's failing grain elevator office on a scorching July morning in 2024, surrounded by overdue scholarship application deadlines, form letters from admissions committees that couldn't see past her rural Nebraska address, and the devastating realization that her dreams of studying environmental engineering at MIT were mathematically impossible without the academic recognition and financial aid that had been systematically denied to a farmer's daughter whose simple science fair project had been publicly ridiculed by judges who couldn't recognize revolutionary innovation when it was presented by a teenager from Broken Bow, Nebraska. The college rejection from MIT lay open beside her cold coffee, like a death sentence for everything Emma had worked toward since elementary school. Its corporate language, reducing 4 years of perfect grades and innovative thinking to a series of standardized test scores and extracurricular activities that admissions committees felt were insufficient for our highly competitive program. The email's final paragraph was particularly crushing. While your academic performance is commendable, we require evidence of exceptional innovation and research capabilities that distinguish our applicants from typical high school students. The cruel irony was that Emma possessed exactly the kind of innovation and research capabilities MIT claimed to value, but her rural Nebraska location and the academic prejudice against farm science had prevented university admissions committees from recognizing work that would soon transform military water security technology and earn recognition from the highest levels of the U.S. Department of Defense. The water purification device that science fair judges had dismissed as overly simplistic farm girl engineering incorporated breakthrough technologies that had been hiding in plain sight for decades, waiting for someone with Emma's unique combination of inherited knowledge and innovative thinking to unlock their extraordinary potential. Emma's modest bedroom, located above the Chen family's grain elevator business that her great-grandfather had built in 1952, felt like a monument to broken dreams and limited opportunities in rural Nebraska, where 4 generations of Chen families had worked the land and supported local agriculture while watching their brightest children leave for cities that offered educational and professional opportunities that small farming communities couldn't provide. The walls were covered with academic achievement certificates, science competition awards, and engineering project photographs that represented years of exceptional work that had been systematically overlooked by college admissions committees, who couldn't appreciate innovation that emerged from agricultural necessity rather than university laboratories. The grain elevator that had once been profitable and essential for the local farming economy was now struggling to compete with corporate agricultural operations that had eliminated the need for independent grain processing and storage facilities throughout rural Nebraska. The massive concrete structure that dominated the Chen property had been built during an era when family farms depended on local infrastructure for crop storage and processing. But consolidation in the agricultural industry had reduced their customer base from dozens of local farmers to fewer than 12 operations that still used independent grain elevators for their harvest storage and processing needs. The 240-acre corn and soybean farm that Emma's family operated represented not just agricultural property, but the accumulated dreams and sacrifices of 4 generations of Chinese-American farmers who had transformed raw Nebraska prairie into productive agricultural land through decades of manual labor, innovative farming techniques, and determination to succeed in rural communities that hadn't always welcomed immigrant families who brought different perspectives and agricultural knowledge to traditional farming operations. The Chen family's success had been built on combining traditional Chinese agricultural wisdom with American farming methods, creating innovative approaches that had made their operation more productive and sustainable than many neighboring farms. Throughout Custer County, Emma's great-grandfather, Dr. Wei Chen, had arrived in Nebraska in 1948 with advanced degrees in agricultural engineering and soil science from Beijing University, along with specialized knowledge in water management and crop production techniques that had been developed over centuries of Chinese agricultural innovation. But discrimination and language barriers had prevented Dr. Wei from accessing professional opportunities that matched his education and expertise, forcing him to work as a manual laborer while saving money to purchase marginal farmland that established families had considered unsuitable for profitable agriculture due to soil quality problems and inadequate water resources. Dr. Wei had spent 30 years proving that innovative soil management, water conservation, and crop rotation techniques could make seemingly impossible land productive and sustainable, establishing farming practices that had been passed down through 4 generations of Chen farmers while also conducting private research into agricultural technologies that had remained hidden from the broader farming community throughout his lifetime. The farmhouse laboratory that Dr. Wei had built in their barn during the 1950s had been the site of experiments and innovations that had contributed to their family's farming success, while also developing technologies that appeared to be decades ahead of anything available to rural farmers during that period. The farmhouse that Dr. Wei Chen had constructed in 1954 had been expanded and improved by each subsequent generation, with Emma's grandfather adding modern irrigation systems in the 1970s, Emma's father installing precision agriculture technology during the 1990s, and Emma herself contributing environmental monitoring systems that she had built during high school science projects. The house reflected the family's commitment to combining traditional values with technological innovation, creating a home that honored their Chinese heritage while embracing American agricultural methods and contemporary scientific approaches to farming operations and environmental management. Emma's grandfather, Dr. James Chen, had inherited not only Dr. Wei's farming operation, but also his passion for agricultural research and innovation, continuing the private experiments and technological development that had made their farm unusually productive while maintaining complete secrecy about research activities that had produced remarkable results in water treatment, soil enhancement, and crop yield optimization. Dr. James had earned a degree in agricultural engineering from the University of Nebraska during the 1970s, but had chosen to return to the family farm rather than pursuing urban career opportunities that would have separated him from the research legacy that Dr. Wei had established. The research laboratory that Dr. James had maintained in their barn throughout the 1980s and 1990s had been far more sophisticated than anything typically associated with family farming operations, equipped with scientific instruments and experimental apparatus that had enabled him to conduct advanced research into water purification technologies, soil chemistry optimization, and agricultural productivity enhancement techniques that had kept their farm profitable, while neighboring operations struggled with declining yields and environmental challenges that affected agricultural production throughout central Nebraska. But Dr. James Chen's sudden death from a stroke in 2019 had occurred during a period when Emma was focused on high school academics and college preparation, preventing her from learning about the full scope of his research activities and the technological innovations that he had been developing in their barn laboratory for over 4 decades. The timing of his death had eliminated the opportunity for Emma to receive direct instruction about research methods and experimental techniques that had been essential for their family's agricultural success, while also advancing scientific knowledge in areas that would later prove to be of extraordinary importance for military and civilian water security applications. Emma's father, David Chen, had inherited the family farm and grain elevator business from Dr. James, but had focused primarily on agricultural production and business management rather than continuing the research activities that had been central to previous generations of Chen farmers. David's agricultural engineering background from Iowa State University had provided him with expertise in modern farming techniques and equipment operation, but he had never shown the same passion for scientific research and technological innovation that had characterized Dr. Wei and Dr. James throughout their farming careers. The agricultural economics that had sustained the Chen farm for 3 generations were being systematically destroyed by corporate consolidation, international trade policies, and climate challenges that made small-scale farming increasingly impossible, despite Emma's family's technical expertise and their decades of successful adaptation to changing agricultural conditions. The corn and soybean markets that had been profitable during David's youth were now controlled by agribusiness corporations that could manipulate commodity prices and eliminate profit margins for independent farmers who lacked the political influence and financial resources to compete with industrial agricultural operations. David Chen had managed the farm successfully throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, building a reputation for innovative farming techniques and environmental sustainability that had made their operation a model for other small farmers who were attempting to remain competitive while maintaining responsible agricultural practices. The precision agriculture systems that David had installed during the late 1990s had incorporated GPS guidance, variable rate fertilizer application, and yield mapping technologies that had improved their agricultural efficiency while reducing environmental impact and production costs that affected farm profitability throughout the region. But David's sudden death from a heart attack in March 2023 had left Emma's mother, Susan, overwhelmed by the complex business and technical demands of managing agricultural operations that required expertise in agronomy, equipment maintenance, financial planning, and market analysis that David had handled throughout their marriage. Susan's background in elementary education and farm bookkeeping had provided her with organizational skills and attention to detail, but agricultural production management required technical knowledge and decision-making capabilities that she had never needed to develop during David's lifetime. The timing of David's death had been particularly devastating, because it had occurred during the critical planning period for the 2023 growing season, when decisions about crop selection, equipment maintenance, and input purchases were essential for successful agricultural operations. Susan Chen had been forced to make complex farming and financial decisions without David's guidance and expertise, while also managing grief, and the emotional challenges of losing her husband and farming partner during the most stressful period of agricultural planning and preparation that required immediate attention and careful coordination. The 2023 growing season that Susan had managed immediately following David's death had been challenging due to drought conditions during critical growing phases and equipment failures that had reduced crop yields while increasing production costs and repair expenses. The weather-related crop losses had eliminated most of their anticipated revenue for 2023, while equipment repairs and replacement costs had increased operating expenses, creating a situation where Susan's first year of independent farm management had resulted in significant financial losses rather than the modest profits that the family had expected based on David's previous agricultural success. The crop insurance that David had maintained had provided minimal compensation for weather-related losses due to deductibles and coverage limitations that reflected the insurance industry's reluctance to provide comprehensive protection for agricultural operations in regions that experienced frequent weather challenges. The insurance settlement that Susan had received for 2023 crop losses had totaled $12,000, an amount that was insufficient to offset the $38,000 in additional expenses and lost revenue that had resulted from weather conditions and Susan's inexperience with crisis management during adverse agricultural conditions that required immediate responses and careful resource allocation. The Chen family's financial difficulties had been compounded by inheritance tax obligations that had been triggered by David's death and the transfer of farm ownership to Susan and Emma. While the farm property had qualified for agricultural valuation that reduced taxable value, the inheritance taxes had still totaled $18,000 due to equipment values and life insurance proceeds that had exceeded exemption thresholds established by Nebraska tax regulations. The inheritance tax payment had been due within 9 months of David's death, requiring the family to deplete savings that had been intended for Emma's college education and agricultural operating expenses that were essential for maintaining farm operations during the transition period. The equipment failures that had accelerated during Susan's independent farming operations reflected both the aging of machinery that David had purchased during the 1990s and early 2000s, and Susan's limited experience with preventive maintenance and repair procedures that were essential for extending equipment life and avoiding costly breakdown repairs during critical farming periods. The John Deere combine harvester that had been reliable during David's management had begun experiencing mechanical failures that required expensive repairs totaling over $15,000 during 2023, costs that exceeded their maintenance budget and forced them to use credit cards and equipment loans to maintain operational capability. The grain elevator business that had supplemented the Chen family's farming income was facing similar challenges due to consolidation in the agricultural industry and the loss of local customers who were selling their crops directly to corporate buyers that offered higher prices and more convenient logistics than independent grain elevators could provide. The elevator's revenue had declined from $180,000 annually during David's management to less than $65,000 during Susan's operation, creating a $115,000 annual income reduction that made their financial situation completely unsustainable without additional revenue sources or dramatic cost reductions. The social isolation that had affected the Chen family since David's death had been compounded by their rural location and their status as one of the few Asian American families in Broken Bow, creating cultural and social barriers that made it difficult for Susan and Emma to access community support and practical assistance during their crisis period. The nearest neighbors were 2 miles away, and their daily contact with other people had been minimal since David's death, creating emotional isolation that made their financial stress more difficult to manage while also reducing their access to practical advice and agricultural expertise from experienced farmers in their community. Emma's academic excellence throughout high school had been motivated by her determination to honor her father's memory and continue the Chen family's tradition of educational achievement and innovation. But her rural Nebraska location and her family's financial crisis had systematically eliminated the opportunities and resources that were necessary for competing with urban students who had access to advanced coursework, research opportunities, and college preparation programs that weren't available in small farming communities. The nearest high school with advanced placement courses was 45 miles away in North Platte, creating transportation challenges that made it impossible for Emma to access educational opportunities that were considered essential for competitive college admissions. The academic disadvantages that rural students faced in college admissions had been particularly frustrating for Emma because her intellectual capabilities and innovative thinking exceeded those of many urban students who had access to better educational resources and opportunities for demonstrating academic achievement through standardized programs that college admissions committees understood and valued. Emma's independent learning and self-directed research projects had developed scientific knowledge and problem-solving capabilities that were far more advanced than typical high school coursework. But rural schools lacked the infrastructure and recognition systems that could document and validate advanced academic work for college admissions purposes. The science project that had led to Emma's humiliation at the Nebraska State Science Fair had been inspired by her family's struggles with water quality issues that affected both their agricultural operations and their household water supply. The artesian well that supplied water for their farm and home had been contaminated by agricultural runoff from neighboring corporate farming operations that used fertilizers and pesticides in quantities that exceeded the filtration capacity of natural soil systems, creating water quality problems that required expensive treatment or alternative water sources that the Chen family couldn't afford during their financial crisis. Emma's water purification device had been designed to address the specific contamination problems that affected rural agricultural communities throughout Nebraska, using innovative filtration and treatment techniques that could remove agricultural chemicals, bacterial contamination, and heavy metals while being simple enough for farmers to build and maintain using readily available materials and basic technical skills. Her design incorporated principles from environmental engineering and agricultural chemistry that she had learned through independent study and online courses that weren't available through her rural high school's limited science curriculum, but were essential for understanding water treatment technologies and environmental remediation techniques. The science fair judges who had dismissed Emma's water purification project as overly simplistic farm girl engineering had failed to recognize the sophisticated scientific principles and innovative engineering solutions that were incorporated into her seemingly basic design. Their dismissive attitude had reflected urban academic bias against rural students and the assumption that meaningful scientific innovation required expensive laboratory equipment and university-level resources that weren't available to teenagers. From farming communities who were forced to develop creative solutions using limited materials and informal educational opportunities. The public humiliation that Emma had experienced during the science fair presentation had been devastating, not only because of the judges' dismissive comments, but also because of the laughter and mockery from other students whose projects had been based on standard laboratory procedures and textbook experiments rather than original research and innovative problem-solving approaches. The judges had praised projects that demonstrated proper scientific methodology and presentation skills, while completely overlooking the practical value and technological innovation that Emma's water purification device represented for addressing real-world environmental challenges. But what the science fair judges didn't know, and what Emma herself had only recently discovered, was that her water purification design had been unconsciously influenced by her grandfather's mysterious research notes that she had found hidden in their barn. Notes that documented advanced filtration techniques and water treatment technologies that appeared to be far more sophisticated than anything that should have been available to a rural Nebraska farmer during the 1980s and 1990s. When Dr. James had been conducting his secretive experiments in agricultural technology and environmental remediation. The barn laboratory that Emma had discovered while searching for spare equipment parts contained not only Dr. James's hidden research materials, but also prototype water treatment devices and experimental filtration systems that suggested his background and activities had been far more complex and significant than anything his family had ever understood about his apparent focus on conventional farming and grain elevator operations throughout Broken Bow, Nebraska. The laboratory equipment and research documentation indicated that Dr. James had been conducting advanced scientific research that exceeded anything typically associated with agricultural operations, suggesting federal connections or specialized training that had never been disclosed to his family. The research notes that Emma had found in Dr. James's laboratory were written in a combination of English and Chinese technical terminology, documenting experimental procedures and technological innovations that seemed to incorporate scientific knowledge from both American and Chinese research traditions, while developing water treatment technologies that were decades ahead of anything commercially available during the period when the experiments had been conducted. The notes included detailed diagrams, chemical formulations, and engineering specifications that suggested Dr. James had been working with materials and technologies that required access to specialized equipment and scientific resources that exceeded what rural farmers typically possessed. The water treatment prototypes that Dr. James had constructed during his decades of research incorporated filtration technologies and purification techniques that appeared to use unconventional materials and processing methods that produced extraordinary results in removing contaminants and pathogens while requiring minimal energy input and maintenance procedures. Emma's testing of the prototype devices had revealed purification capabilities that exceeded the performance of commercial water treatment systems while using construction techniques that could be replicated using readily available materials and basic manufacturing procedures. The financial pressures that were forcing Emma and her mother to consider selling the family farm were creating urgency about preserving Dr. James's research legacy and determining whether his technological innovations might have commercial or academic value that could provide solutions to their economic crisis. The property taxes that Custer County assessed on agricultural land had increased substantially during the past decade, creating tax burdens that small farmers couldn't afford despite declining agricultural profitability, and the Chen family's annual property tax bill had increased from $12,000 in 2019 to $19,000 in 2024. Representing a financial obligation that exceeded their farm's profit margins. The equipment loans that were consuming their limited resources reflected the impossible trap that modern farming had created for independent operators who needed expensive machinery to remain competitive but couldn't generate sufficient revenue to justify the loan payments required for purchasing or maintaining contemporary agricultural equipment. Susan's monthly equipment payments totaled $3,200, while their agricultural income during 2023 had averaged less than $2,800 monthly, creating a deficit that required constant borrowing and credit card usage to maintain basic operations and family living expenses. The grain elevator business that had once provided stable supplemental income was facing elimination due to corporate competition and changing agricultural marketing patterns that had eliminated most of their traditional customers while creating operating expenses that exceeded revenue from their reduced customer base. The maintenance costs for the elevator equipment and facilities were exceeding $18,000 annually, while revenue had declined to less than $65,000, creating a business operation that was losing money and consuming resources that the Chen family needed for basic survival and agricultural operations. As Emma sat in her bedroom that July morning, facing the mathematical impossibility of affording college, while her family's farm struggled to survive, she was unaware that her simple science fair project had incorporated revolutionary water treatment technologies that would soon attract the attention of federal agencies whose interest in her family's hidden research legacy would exceed anything she could have imagined possible about her grandfather's seemingly ordinary agricultural activities and community involvement throughout rural Nebraska. The rejection letters from MIT, Stanford, Caltech, and a dozen other universities represented more than just educational disappointment. They symbolized the systematic exclusion of rural innovation and the academic world's inability to recognize scientific advancement that emerged from practical necessity rather than theoretical research conducted in university laboratories with unlimited resources and institutional support. Emma's water purification device, dismissed as primitive farm engineering, contained breakthrough technologies that would soon be classified as strategically important for military water security operations and civilian emergency preparedness applications. The most heartbreaking aspect of Emma's situation was knowing that her father David would have understood the value of her scientific work and would have found ways to support her educational ambitions despite their family's financial difficulties. David had always encouraged Emma's interest in environmental engineering and had recognized her exceptional abilities in scientific problem-solving, but his sudden death had eliminated not only emotional support, but also the practical guidance and advocacy that could have helped Emma navigate college admissions and financial aid applications more effectively. The college counseling resources available to rural students were virtually non-existent compared to the comprehensive support systems that urban and suburban students could access for college preparation and admissions assistance. Emma had been forced to research colleges, prepare applications, and navigate financial aid procedures without professional guidance, while also helping her mother manage agricultural operations and cope with their family's financial crisis during the most demanding period of the college admissions process. The scholarship opportunities that were available to rural students often required demonstration of community leadership and extracurricular involvement that was difficult to achieve in farming communities that lacked the organized programs and volunteer opportunities that urban students could access for building impressive resumes. Emma's practical contributions to her family's farming operations and her scientific research projects represented substantial achievements and community service, but college admissions committees couldn't evaluate agricultural work and rural innovation using the same criteria they applied to conventional urban student activities. The standardized testing that dominated college admissions had been particularly challenging for Emma because rural schools lacked test preparation resources and advanced coursework that urban students could access for improving their competitive standings. Emma's natural intelligence and scientific aptitude had enabled her to achieve respectable test scores despite inadequate preparation. But her results couldn't compete with urban students who had access to professional tutoring and test preparation programs that were unavailable in rural Nebraska communities. The financial aid calculations that determined Emma's eligibility for college assistance had been based on her family's agricultural assets rather than their actual income and cash flow, creating situations where the Chen family appeared financially capable of supporting college expenses while actually lacking the liquid resources necessary for tuition and living expenses. The federal financial aid formulas failed to account for the economic realities of agricultural operations that required substantial equipment investments and working capital while generating irregular income that couldn't support major additional expenses like college tuition. But Emma had no idea that within weeks, an extraordinary sequence of events would bring federal water security experts to their struggling Nebraska farm, where they would recognize that her simple water purification device incorporated technologies that had been developed by her grandfather through decades of classified research that had remained hidden in their barn laboratory for over 30 years. Research that would transform her family's desperate situation while contributing to America's military preparedness and civilian emergency response capabilities in ways that would honor both her scientific abilities and her family's extraordinary legacy of innovation and service. The devastating sequence of events that had reduced the Chen family from successful multi-generational farmers to desperate people facing foreclosure had begun not with any single catastrophe, but with the slow-motion collapse of American agricultural economics that had been systematically destroying family farms throughout Nebraska and across the rural United States for over 2 decades. What made the Chen family's situation particularly tragic was that everything that had destroyed their 4-generation legacy had been beyond their control, representing the intersection of global market forces, corporate agricultural consolidation, and federal policy changes that had eliminated the economic foundations that had sustained family farming throughout the 20th century. The first domino in the Chen family's cascade of financial destruction had fallen in 2018, when the US-China trade war had eliminated the soybean export markets that had provided stability for Nebraska farmers since the 1990s. The tariffs and retaliatory trade policies that had emerged from the diplomatic conflict between the world's 2 largest economies had particularly devastated agricultural communities throughout the Midwest, where soybean production had been specifically targeted by Chinese trade restrictions that eliminated over $12 billion in annual agricultural exports that had supported thousands of family farming operations across Nebraska, Iowa, and surrounding agricultural states. Emma's father, David Chen, had recognized the implications of the trade war for their family's agricultural operations and had attempted to prepare their farm for economic transition by reducing soybean acreage while increasing corn production and expanding their grain elevator services to neighboring farmers who were facing similar market challenges. David's transition strategy had been sound and had initially succeeded in maintaining farm profitability during 2018 and early 2019, when commodity prices remained relatively stable and weather conditions supported productive growing seasons that generated sufficient revenue to cover equipment payments and property expenses. But the agricultural market disruptions that had resulted from the trade war had created ripple effects throughout rural Nebraska that had made farming operations increasingly difficult to manage profitably, despite decades of successful agricultural production and business management expertise. The uncertainty about future trade relationships had made long-term agricultural planning nearly impossible, while commodity price volatility had created financial risks that small farmers couldn't absorb without substantial cash reserves that most family operations had never needed to maintain during previous periods of agricultural stability. The timing of the trade war impacts had been particularly challenging for the Chen family because David had recently invested in precision agriculture equipment and grain elevator Upgrades that had been financed through 5-year loans that required consistent agricultural income to maintain manageable debt service obligations. The equipment investments had been justified by commodity price projections and export market assumptions that had proven completely inaccurate due to the trade policies that had eliminated Chinese soybean purchases and created agricultural market conditions that made equipment loan payments increasingly difficult to manage. David Chen's decision to expand their grain elevator operations during 2018 had been based on analysis of local agricultural trends and the opportunity to provide services to neighboring farmers who were consolidating their marketing operations to reduce costs during challenging economic conditions. The elevator expansion had required substantial investment in storage capacity, handling equipment, and truck scales that had been financed through agricultural development loans that had seemed reasonable when local farmers were increasing their grain storage and processing requirements, but the trade war disruptions had affected not only the Chen family's agricultural production, but also their grain elevator customers, who had reduced their storage requirements and began selling crops directly to corporate buyers that offered higher prices and more flexible marketing arrangements than independent elevators could provide. The loss of elevator customers had been gradual but devastating, reducing revenue from grain handling operations while leaving the Chen family with substantial loan obligations for equipment and facilities that were no longer generating sufficient income to justify the investment costs. The agricultural insurance programs that had previously provided protection against weather-related losses and market volatility had become increasingly expensive and restrictive during the period when farmers needed assistance most, reflecting the insurance industry's response to climate change impacts and agricultural market instability that had made crop insurance significantly more costly while providing reduced coverage for the types of losses that farmers were actually experiencing. The Chen family's crop insurance premiums had increased from $8,400 annually in 2017 to $14,600 in 2019, consuming agricultural income that was needed for equipment maintenance and debt service, while providing coverage that excluded many weather-related and market-related losses. The federal agricultural support programs that had sustained family farmers during previous periods of economic difficulty had been systematically reduced during the late 2010s, reflecting political priorities that favored corporate agriculture and urban interests over small family farming operations that lacked the political influence necessary for maintaining agricultural assistance programs. The Conservation Reserve Program payments that had supplemented farm income during David's earlier farming operations had been reduced by 35% due to funding limitations and program restrictions that prevented many farmers from accessing assistance that had been available to previous generations. Emma's mother, Susan Chen, had attempted to supplement their agricultural income through substitute teaching and administrative work that could be performed during periods when farming operations didn't require her immediate attention, but the rural location of their farm and the demands of agricultural management had limited her employment opportunities to part-time positions that provided minimal additional income while consuming time and energy that was needed for farm management and family responsibilities. Susan's teaching experience and organizational skills had been valuable for managing farm finances and administrative procedures, but her off-farm employment opportunities were restricted by transportation challenges and scheduling conflicts. With agricultural operations, the equipment maintenance problems that had accelerated during 2019 and 2020 had reflected both the aging of machinery that David had purchased during the 1990s and early 2000s, and the increased operational demands that had resulted from their efforts to maintain agricultural productivity while reducing input costs during challenging market conditions. The John Deere combine harvester that had been reliable throughout David's farming career had begun experiencing mechanical failures that required expensive repairs, totaling over $18,000 during 2019, costs that exceeded their maintenance budget, and forced them to use credit cards and short-term loans to maintain operational capability during critical harvest periods. The grain elevator equipment that David had purchased during the expansion project had required additional maintenance and repair costs that had been underestimated during the initial financial planning, reflecting the complex mechanical systems and specialized components that were necessary for contemporary grain handling operations. The belt conveyors, grain cleaners, and storage ventilation systems had experienced frequent breakdowns that required professional repair services and replacement parts that were expensive and sometimes difficult to obtain within timeframes that prevented extended operational shutdowns during busy agricultural periods. The property taxes that Custer County had assessed on agricultural land and business facilities had increased substantially during the late 2010s, as local governments had attempted to address budget shortfalls by increasing revenue from property owners, creating tax burdens that small farmers couldn't afford despite the declining profitability of agricultural operations. The Chen family's annual property tax bill had increased from $12,000 in 2017 to $19,000 in 2020, representing a 58% increase that had exceeded their farm's profit margins and had created impossible choices between paying taxes and maintaining agricultural operations that were essential for generating income needed to cover basic living expenses. The health insurance costs that had affected the Chen family during David's final years had been particularly devastating because agricultural families were excluded from employer-sponsored health insurance programs and were forced to purchase individual policies that were extremely expensive while providing limited coverage for routine medical care and prescription medications. The Chen family's health insurance premiums had increased from $18,000 annually in 2017 to $28,000 in 2020, consuming agricultural income that was needed for equipment maintenance and debt service while providing health coverage that still required substantial out-of-pocket expenses for medical care and prescription drugs. David Chen's developing health problems during 2020 and 2021 had created additional medical expenses and reduced his ability to manage the physical demands of agricultural operations during critical periods when farming activities required immediate attention and careful coordination. The high blood pressure and cardiovascular symptoms that had eventually led to David's fatal heart attack had been managed through medications and lifestyle changes that had reduced his energy and physical capabilities while creating medical expenses that exceeded $12,000 annually, despite their health insurance coverage that included substantial deductibles and co-payment requirements. The social isolation that had affected rural farming communities throughout Nebraska during the COVID-19 pandemic had been particularly challenging for the Chen family due to their location and their limited social connections outside of agricultural and business relationships. The pandemic restrictions that had affected agricultural marketing, equipment service, and community support systems had made farming operations more difficult to manage while also reducing access to technical assistance and social interaction that had been important for maintaining morale and practical problem-solving capabilities during challenging agricultural conditions. The labor shortages that had affected agricultural operations throughout the Midwest during 2020 and 2021 had forced the Chen family to handle farming activities that had previously been performed by seasonal workers who were no longer available due to immigration restrictions and pandemic-related labor market disruptions. The additional physical demands and time requirements had contributed to David's cardiovascular stress, while also reducing the efficiency and quality of agricultural operations that required specialized knowledge and experience for optimal crop production and equipment management. The commodity price volatility that had characterized agricultural markets during 2020 and 2021 had made financial planning nearly impossible for family farming operations that needed to make equipment and input purchase decisions months in advance of harvest periods when revenue would be generated. The corn prices that had ranged from $3.20 to $6.40 per bushel during 2020 had created marketing challenges that required expertise in commodity futures and risk management that small farmers typically didn't possess, while soybean price fluctuations had been even more extreme and unpredictable throughout the agricultural marketing periods. The supply chain disruptions that had affected agricultural input costs during 2020 and 2021 had created fertilizer and chemical shortages that had forced farmers to pay premium prices for essential production inputs while also dealing with delivery delays that had interfered with optimal timing for planting and crop management activities. The fertilizer costs that had increased by over 200% during 2021 had eliminated profit margins for many crops while creating input cost uncertainties that had made agricultural planning extremely difficult for farmers who needed to commit to production expenses before knowing what commodity prices would be available during harvest periods. David Chen's attempts to reduce agricultural input costs through alternative fertilizer and pest management strategies had been partially successful, but had required substantial research and experimentation that had consumed time and energy while creating additional risks during critical agricultural periods when conventional production methods would have been more reliable. The organic fertilizer programs and integrated pest management techniques that David had implemented during 2020 and 2021 had reduced chemical input costs while maintaining crop yields, but had required extensive record keeping and monitoring. That had increased management demands during periods when David's health problems were reducing his physical capabilities. The equipment financing problems that had developed during 2021 had reflected both the Chen family's deteriorating debt-to-income ratios and the agricultural lending industry's increasing reluctance to provide financing for small farming operations that were experiencing financial difficulties. The refinancing application that David had submitted for their combine harvester loan had been denied due to insufficient collateral and cash flow projections that didn't meet contemporary lending standards, forcing them to continue making payments on equipment loans that consumed an unsustainable percentage of their agricultural income. The grain elevator business challenges that had accelerated during 2021 had been caused by the loss of additional customers who had decided to sell crops directly to corporate buyers that offered more competitive prices and reduced transportation costs compared to the services that independent elevators could provide. The revenue declined from $180,000 annually in 2019 to $85,000 in 2021 had created a business operation that was losing money while consuming management time and resources that were needed for their agricultural production activities. David's increasing anxiety about their family's financial situation had affected his decision-making capabilities and his ability to maintain the optimistic leadership that had characterized his farming management throughout previous challenges and difficult agricultural periods. The stress of managing multiple business problems while dealing with health issues and family concerns had created sleep disruption and emotional difficulties that had interfered with David's ability to develop effective strategies for addressing their accumulated financial and operational challenges. The winter of 2022 had been particularly difficult for the Chen family due to heating costs that had exceeded $4,800 for their farmhouse and grain elevator facilities, while equipment storage and maintenance activities had required additional expenses for building repairs and machinery servicing that had consumed resources they needed for spring planting preparations. The propane and electricity costs for maintaining their grain elevator operations during winter months had exceeded revenue from storage services, creating additional financial stress during the period when agricultural operations generated minimal income. The spring planting season of 2022 had required seed and fertilizer purchases that had exceeded $45,000, amounts that had been financed through credit cards and short-term loans that had created debt obligations with interest rates exceeding 15% annually. The input cost financing had been necessary for maintaining agricultural production, but had created debt service requirements that exceeded their farm's profit margins, even under optimal growing conditions and favorable commodity prices during harvest periods. The equipment breakdown that had occurred during the critical corn planting period in May 2022 had required emergency repairs that had cost $11,000 and had delayed planting operations by 8 days, reducing crop yields and creating additional stress on other equipment that had been used for extended periods during emergency agricultural operations. The planter repair costs had been financed through a home equity loan that had used their farmhouse as collateral, creating additional financial risks and debt obligations that had further compromised their family's economic security. David Chen's final heart attack on March 15, 2023, had occurred during the morning when he had been preparing equipment for spring fieldwork, eliminating his agricultural expertise and farm management capabilities during the most critical period of agricultural planning and preparation that required immediate decisions about crop selection, input purchases, and equipment readiness for the upcoming growing season. The timing of David's death had been catastrophic for their agricultural operations, because spring planning decisions would determine their farm's productivity and financial performance throughout the entire 2023 growing season. The medical expenses associated with David's emergency treatment and funeral arrangements had exceeded $23,000 despite their health insurance coverage, creating additional debt obligations that had consumed the life insurance proceeds that had been intended to provide. Susan and Emma, with time to adjust to single-parent family management and reduced household income. The medical debt had been particularly devastating because it had occurred during the same period when Susan needed financial resources for spring planting operations and agricultural input purchases that were essential for maintaining farm productivity. During her first year of independent agricultural management, the emotional trauma of David's sudden death had affected Susan's ability to make the complex agricultural and financial decisions that were required during spring planting periods, while Emma's need to help with farm management had interfered. With her final semester of high school coursework and college preparation activities during the most demanding period of academic and application requirements, the family crisis had eliminated Emma's opportunities for completing college visits and scholarship applications that required extensive research and careful attention during specific deadlines that couldn't be postponed due to family emergencies. The agricultural extension services that might have provided technical assistance and guidance to Susan during her transition to independent farm management had been eliminated due to state budget cuts that had reduced rural agricultural support programs throughout Nebraska. The extension agent who had provided advice and assistance to David throughout his farming career had been eliminated in 2022, leaving Susan without access to professional agricultural expertise during the period when she needed guidance most. For managing complex farming operations that required specialized knowledge and experience. The legal and administrative procedures that had been required for settling David's estate and transferring farm ownership to Susan had consumed over $8,000 in attorney fees and court costs, while requiring substantial time and attention during critical spring planting periods when agricultural operations demanded immediate decision-making and careful coordination. The estate settlement process had been complicated by equipment liens and business partnerships that had required legal documentation and financial analysis, creating delays and expenses that had prevented Susan from focusing completely on agricultural management during her most challenging transition period. The banking relationships that David had maintained throughout his farming career had been complicated by his death, and the changes in farm ownership and management that had affected the Chen family's creditworthiness and their ability to access agricultural financing for seasonal operating expenses and equipment purchases. The loan officers who had worked with David for over 20 years had been transferred or retired, leaving Susan to establish new banking relationships with personnel who were unfamiliar with their farming operation and less willing to provide flexible financing arrangements during their transition period. The crop marketing strategies that David had developed for managing commodity price risks and optimizing agricultural revenue had been based on relationships with grain buyers and agricultural marketing specialists who had worked with him for decades, but were reluctant to provide the same services and credit arrangements to Susan due to her inexperience with agricultural marketing and commodity sales procedures. The loss of established marketing relationships had reduced Susan's ability to achieve optimal prices for their crops, while also limiting her access to market information and price risk management tools that were essential for contemporary agricultural operations. The equipment maintenance and repair capabilities that David had developed through decades of farming experience had been lost with his death, forcing Susan to rely on professional repair services that were expensive and sometimes unavailable. During critical agricultural periods when equipment failures could destroy crops and eliminate seasonal income, Susan's limited mechanical knowledge and experience with agricultural equipment had made her dependent on repair services that consumed resources they needed for basic operations, while creating operational delays that affected farming efficiency and productivity. As Susan and Emma struggled through their first year of independent farm management during 2023, they were unaware that the agricultural challenges and financial difficulties that were destroying their family's four-generation farming legacy were also creating the desperate circumstances that would soon force them to explore every possible option for generating income, including the mysterious barn laboratory that Dr. James Chen had maintained throughout his lifetime, but had never fully explained to his family members who had respected his privacy while remaining curious about his secretive research activities and technological innovations. With foreclosure proceedings scheduled to begin in exactly 45 days and every conventional option for generating income exhausted, Emma Chen found herself staring at the massive barn laboratory that her grandfather, Dr. James, had maintained throughout his lifetime, a facility that represented her family's final, desperate hope for discovering assets or technologies that might provide solutions to their impossible financial crisis. The barn, originally constructed in 1952 and extensively renovated by Dr. James between 1980 and 1995, stood as the most sophisticated and well-equipped building on the Chen property. Its advanced environmental controls and specialized research equipment reflecting scientific capabilities that had always seemed unusually sophisticated for typical agricultural operations in rural Nebraska. Emma's consideration of the barn laboratory as a potential source of valuable assets had been motivated by sheer desperation rather than realistic expectations. But her growing examination of the facility's research equipment and technological innovations was revealing aspects of her grandfather's work that she had never fully understood during his lifetime. The laboratory's design, experimental apparatus, and documentation systems exceeded what agricultural research typically required, suggesting that Dr. James had been conducting scientific investigations with purposes and applications that had remained hidden from his family throughout decades of apparently conventional farming operations and community involvement. The economic analysis that Emma had attempted for potentially valuable research assets and technological innovations was both promising and overwhelming, indicating that Dr. James's experimental work might contain intellectual property, research, data, or technological developments that could have commercial or academic value if properly evaluated and marketed by qualified experts. The potential value of his research materials could address their family's immediate debt obligations and possibly prevent foreclosure if the technologies could be licensed or sold to companies or institutions that needed innovative solutions for environmental and agricultural challenges. Emma's preliminary assessment of the laboratory equipment had indicated that Dr. James's research capabilities were remarkably advanced despite the rural location and apparent isolation from major research institutions with scientific instruments and experimental apparatus that appeared to represent substantial investments in research infrastructure that exceeded what individual farmers typically possessed or could justify economically. The water analysis equipment, chemical processing systems, and environmental monitoring devices suggested that Dr. James had been conducting research that required precision measurement and control capabilities that were associated with university laboratories or corporate research facilities. The environmental control systems that Dr. James had incorporated into the barn laboratory were particularly sophisticated, with temperature and humidity regulation, air filtration, and contamination prevention capabilities that seemed designed for applications requiring precise experimental conditions rather than the relatively simple requirements of agricultural storage and equipment maintenance. Emma had always assumed that Dr. James's thorough approach to environmental control reflected his engineering background and his commitment to protecting research equipment and materials. But her detailed examination of the systems was revealing features that exceeded what typical agricultural or even basic research applications would require or justify economically. But as Emma spent increasing amounts of time examining the laboratory equipment and attempting to understand her grandfather's research activities, she was beginning to recognize aspects of Dr. James's background and scientific work that had remained mysterious or unexplained throughout his lifetime. Dr. James Chen had been known throughout Custer County not only for his agricultural expertise and innovative farming techniques, but also for his unusual knowledge of water chemistry, environmental engineering, and what had appeared to be extensive correspondence with government agencies and research institutions that had seemed unrelated to typical farming operations or rural community activities. The true story of Dr. James Chen's background and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought him to rural Nebraska in 1975 had been far more complex and significant than anything his family had ever understood or that Dr. James had ever revealed during his decades of successful farming operations and community involvement. What Emma had never known about her grandfather was that Dr. James's presence in rural Nebraska and his decision to establish an advanced research laboratory at their family farm had been motivated not by agricultural interests or academic curiosity, but by his role as a covert researcher for federal water security programs that required secure facilities and specialized expertise for developing technologies that could protect America's water infrastructure from potential threats and contamination. Events. Dr. James Chen's true identity had been Dr. James Wei Chen, a water chemistry specialist and environmental engineer who had earned advanced degrees from MIT and Stanford University before working for the Environmental Protection Agency and later for classified federal programs that were developing water, purification and security technologies during the critical years of Cold War environmental and infrastructure protection initiatives. Dr. James's specialized expertise in water treatment, contamination detection, and purification system design had made him essential for protecting civilian water supplies and developing military water security capabilities that required sophisticated technologies and research facilities that could remain undetected by foreign intelligence services and unauthorized individuals. The decision to relocate Dr. James from his federal research position in Washington, D.C. to rural Nebraska in 1975 had been part of a comprehensive federal program for establishing secure research and development facilities for water security technologies in locations throughout the United States that could provide long-term protection while maintaining the appearance of typical civilian operations. The program, known internally as Operation Clearwater, had been designed to address concerns about the vulnerability of centralized water research facilities to foreign espionage, natural disasters, and potential security breaches that could compromise decades of accumulated water security research and technological capabilities. Dr. James's assignment to Custer County, Nebraska, had been based on careful analysis of geographical, demographic, and security factors that made rural agricultural areas ideal for concealing water security research facilities that required sophisticated laboratory equipment and environmental controls, while maintaining complete operational secrecy over extended periods. The Nebraska location had been selected specifically because its agricultural economy, stable population, and distance from major urban centers created optimal conditions for long-term covert research operations that needed to remain undetected for decades while developing technologies of extraordinary importance for national water security and civilian emergency preparedness. The specific property that Dr. James had purchased in Custer County had been identified through federal geological and environmental surveys that had determined it possessed unique characteristics for supporting classified water research operations, including geological stability, underground water systems, and topographical features that could accommodate sophisticated research facilities while remaining invisible to aerial surveillance and casual observation. The property's existing agricultural buildings and operations had provided perfect cover for research projects that could incorporate advanced water treatment technologies and experimental facilities while maintaining the appearance of typical farming improvements and agricultural activities. The barn laboratory that Dr. James had extensively developed during the 1980s and 1990s had been designed not as an agricultural facility, but as a sophisticated water security research complex that could develop and test advanced purification technologies, contamination detection systems, and water treatment innovations under controlled conditions that would maintain research integrity for decades while remaining completely undetectable during routine agricultural operations and community interactions. Dr. James's engineering background and his specialized training in water security technologies had been essential for creating research facilities that could develop breakthrough technologies while protecting classified research from unauthorized access and foreign intelligence interest. The research project that Dr. James had undertaken throughout his decades at the Nebraska facility had incorporated technologies and experimental techniques that were far more advanced than anything typically available for water research during that period. The water analysis equipment that Dr. James had installed included precision contamination detection, chemical composition analysis, and purification effectiveness measurement capabilities that could evaluate water treatment technologies under conditions that simulated both civilian municipal water systems and military field operations that required portable and reliable water security capabilities. The experimental water treatment systems that Dr. James had developed included multiple layers of purification and contamination removal technologies that were designed to address both conventional water quality problems and potential chemical, biological, and radiological threats that could be used by foreign adversaries or terrorist organizations to compromise American water supplies. The treatment technologies that Dr. James had been perfecting incorporated innovative filtration materials, chemical neutralization techniques, and purification processes that could provide comprehensive water security protection while being simple enough for deployment in emergency situations and military operations. The classified materials that Dr. James had been assigned to protect and develop included some of the most sensitive water security research conducted by American federal agencies during the Cold War and post-Cold War periods, including captured foreign water contamination technologies, domestic water infrastructure vulnerability assessments, and experimental purification techniques that had been developed for military operations in hostile environments where conventional water sources could not be trusted or were unavailable for extended periods. The foreign water contamination technologies that comprised a significant portion of Dr. James's research materials had been obtained through intelligence operations that had documented potential threats to American water infrastructure and civilian water supplies. These materials included information about chemical and biological agents that could be used to contaminate water systems, technical specifications for devices that could introduce contaminants into municipal water supplies, and countermeasure technologies that could detect and neutralize water-based threats before they could affect civilian populations or military operations. The most significant portion of Dr. James's research focused on developing advanced water and purification technologies that could address multiple types of contamination simultaneously while being manufacturable using readily available materials and deployable in emergency situations where conventional water treatment facilities were unavailable or compromised. These technologies included innovative filtration materials that could remove chemical, biological, and radiological contaminants while being simple enough for use by military personnel and civilian emergency responders who lacked specialized technical training. The water infrastructure vulnerability assessments that Dr. James had been developing included comprehensive analysis of American municipal water systems, identification of critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited by adversaries, and recommendations for protective measures that could enhance water security without requiring massive infrastructure investments that would be economically and politically impossible to implement. These assessments represented decades of accumulated intelligence about American water infrastructure that remained classified due to their potential value for planning attacks against civilian water supplies. The experimental purification techniques that Dr. James was developing included breakthrough technologies that could provide comprehensive water treatment using innovative chemical processes, advanced filtration materials, and energy-efficient treatment methods that could be deployed in military operations and civilian emergency situations where conventional water treatment equipment was unavailable or impractical. These techniques represented revolutionary advances in water purification that had potential applications for military operations, disaster response, and developing regions where access to clean water was limited by economic and infrastructure constraints. Dr. James's role as guardian of these water security technologies had required not only sophisticated research capabilities, but also ongoing communication with federal agencies and periodic updates of research procedures and security arrangements that reflected changing technology and evolving threats to American water infrastructure. Dr. James's apparent isolation in rural Nebraska had actually been supported by regular contact with federal officials who monitored his research progress and security while maintaining the operational secrecy that was essential for protecting the research facility from detection or compromise by foreign intelligence services. The communication systems that Dr. James had maintained with federal agencies had been carefully designed to avoid creating obvious connections between his Nebraska research operations and government water security programs using scientific conferences, academic publications, and periodic consulting arrangements that appeared to be routine professional activities, while actually serving as opportunities for federal officials to assess research progress and coordinate necessary updates to research priorities and security procedures. The financial support that Dr. James had received for his water security research activities had been channeled through agricultural grants, environmental research contracts, and consulting arrangements that provided legitimate explanations for his research funding and equipment purchases, while actually supporting one of the most significant water security research programs in American history. Dr. James's apparent success as a Nebraska farmer had been enhanced by federal subsidies and support that were disguised as routine agricultural assistance, while actually funding advanced water security research that was essential for protecting American civilian and military water supplies. The agricultural expertise that Dr. James had developed during his decades in Nebraska had been genuine and substantial, reflecting his commitment to maintaining authentic farming operations that could provide effective cover for his water security research, while also contributing to his family's financial security and community integration. Dr. James's success as a farmer had been essential for his acceptance in rural Nebraska communities and had provided the social connections and local reputation that were necessary for avoiding suspicion about his background or research activities. The decision to maintain complete secrecy about his water security research background, even from his own family, had been based on security requirements that demanded operational compartmentalization and personal security measures that could protect both the classified research and Dr. James's family from potential threats that could result from foreign intelligence interest in his research facility or the technologies he was developing. Dr. James's success in maintaining his cover identity for over 4 decades had represented one of the most successful long-term covert research operations in American water security history. But Dr. James's sudden death in 2019 had created a critical security situation for the federal agencies that depended on his research and the water security technologies that he had been developing, as his death had eliminated the research expertise and security supervision that had protected extremely sensitive water security assets for over 40 years. The federal response to Dr. James's death had been complicated by the need to maintain operational secrecy while also ensuring continued protection of research materials and technologies that remained classified and potentially sensitive due to their applications for military operations and civilian water security. The decision to allow Dr. James's property and the classified research facility to pass to his son David through normal inheritance procedures had been based on assessments that indicated immediate federal intervention could compromise operational secrecy and create security problems that exceeded the risks of temporary interruption in professional supervision of the research facility. Federal water security officials had concluded that David's apparent focus on agricultural operations and his limited interest in his father's research activities created acceptable conditions for temporary continuation of research operations, until appropriate long-term arrangements could be developed. David Chen's complete ignorance of his father's water security research background and the true nature of the technologies being developed in the barn laboratory had been considered advantageous by federal security officials who preferred that the research facility continue operating under civilian cover rather than transitioning to obvious federal supervision that could attract attention from foreign intelligence services or domestic security threats. David's natural assumption that his father had been conducting conventional agricultural research provided optimal cover for continued development of water security technologies that remained classified despite their age and potential applications. The sophisticated research equipment and experimental systems that Dr. James had built into the barn laboratory had been designed to continue operating effectively for extended periods without professional supervision, using technologies and procedures that could maintain optimal research conditions and security protection while awaiting eventual federal assessment and possible transition to alternative arrangements. Dr. James's planning had anticipated the possibility of his death or incapacitation and had incorporated systems that could protect the classified research even during periods when professional federal supervision was temporarily unavailable. But the federal agencies responsible for Dr. James's water security research had been monitoring David's farming operation and the potential threats to the research facility that could result from financial difficulties or property sales that might bring unauthorized individuals into contact with the laboratory areas and classified research materials. David's death in 2023 had created an even more urgent security situation that required immediate federal attention to protect water security technologies while maintaining operational secrecy and avoiding public disclosure of the research facility that had operated successfully for over 40 years. The contingency plans that had been developed for addressing security emergencies at Dr. James's facility included procedures for rapid federal intervention and research material recovery operations that could be implemented if circumstances threatened the continued security of the research facility or the water security technologies it contained. These plans had been designed to provide federal agencies with options for protecting water security assets while minimizing public attention and maintaining secrecy about the true nature of Dr. James's research activities and the technologies he had been developing. As Emma continued her desperate examination of laboratory equipment and research materials during the final weeks before foreclosure, she remained completely unaware that her family's financial crisis was creating national security concerns for federal agencies who had been monitoring their situation and preparing contingency responses that could protect classified water security research while potentially providing solutions to Emma's financial problems that might preserve both their farm and the continued security of one of America's most significant water technology research facilities. The breakthrough discovery that would change everything occurred during Emma's systematic examination of her grandfather's research documentation, when she found detailed experimental records that documented the development of revolutionary water purification technologies that appeared to be decades ahead of anything commercially available. The research notes included specifications for filtration materials, purification processes, and contamination detection techniques that could address water security challenges that were currently considered unsolvable by conventional water treatment technologies. Emma's analysis of her grandfather's water purification research revealed that her science fair project had unconsciously incorporated several of the breakthrough technologies that Dr. James had been developing throughout his decades of classified research, creating a water treatment device that achieved extraordinary purification results while appearing to be simple farm engineering. The filtration materials that Emma had used in her device included components that Dr. James had developed for military water security applications, while her purification processes incorporated chemical techniques that were classified as strategically important for American water infrastructure protection. The most extraordinary aspect of Emma's discovery was realizing that her simple water purification device actually represented the practical application of revolutionary technologies that had been developed for military operations and civilian emergency preparedness, technologies that could transform water security capabilities for both military and civilian applications while being simple enough for deployment in developing regions where conventional water treatment infrastructure was unavailable or economically unfeasible. The documentation that Emma found in Dr. James's research files included correspondence with federal agencies that confirmed his role in classified water security programs and indicated that his research had produced breakthrough technologies that were considered strategically important for American national security and civilian emergency preparedness. The federal interest in Dr. James's research had continued throughout his lifetime and had included plans for eventual technology transfer and commercialization that could benefit both military operations and civilian water security applications. The resolution of Emma's crisis would require careful coordination between her legitimate needs for financial assistance and federal requirements for continued protection of classified water security technologies that had been safely developed at their family farm for over 4 decades. The extraordinary value of the water purification technologies that Dr. James had developed, combined with the federal government's responsibility for their continued security and development, had created circumstances that could transform Emma's desperate situation into opportunities for cooperation that might benefit both her family's economic survival and America's ongoing water security research requirements. But Emma had no idea that her grandfather's barn laboratory contained classified water security research worth tens of millions of dollars to the federal government, or that her approaching foreclosure was being monitored by federal agencies, whose interest in preserving the Chen family farm would soon exceed anything she could have imagined possible about her grandfather's seemingly ordinary agricultural research activities and community involvement throughout rural Nebraska. It was 2:15 p.m. on that sweltering August afternoon when the sound of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed first penetrated the oppressive silence that had settled over the Chen farm as Nebraska's most severe drought in recorded history continued devastating agricultural operations throughout Custer County, forcing all farmers to seek emergency water sources while creating crisis conditions that would bring federal water security experts directly to Emma's property in circumstances that would seem miraculous to anyone who didn't understand the sophisticated monitoring and contingency planning that had been protecting Dr. James Chen's water research facility for over 4 decades. The convoy of federal vehicles that was approaching the Chen property with obvious urgency belonged to the Department of Defense's Water Security Task Force, a specialized unit responsible for identifying and protecting America's most critical water technology research assets during national emergency conditions. The convoy included Dr. Sarah Martinez, a 45-year-old federal water security specialist who worked for the Pentagon's Advanced Research Projects Agency, which was responsible for developing breakthrough technologies that could protect military water supplies and civilian water infrastructure from potential threats and contamination events. Dr. Martinez's professional background included advanced degrees in environmental engineering and water chemistry from Caltech and MIT, specialized training in military water security from the Army Corps of Engineers, and over 20 years of experience managing classified water technology research programs that were essential for protecting American military operations and civilian emergency preparedness capabilities. Her expertise in advanced water purification systems and contamination detection technologies had made her one of the leading federal authorities on water security research, classified water treatment technologies, and the specialized facilities that had been used throughout American history for developing water protection capabilities. The classified briefing that Dr. Martinez had received at USS Stratcom headquarters in Omaha had focused on urgent security concerns related to Dr. James Chen's water research facility, which required immediate federal assessment and possible emergency intervention due to the approaching foreclosure that threatened to expose classified water security technologies to unauthorized access or potential foreign intelligence interest. The briefing had indicated that Dr. James's research facility contained breakthrough water purification technologies that were classified as strategically critical for American military operations and civilian water security preparedness. Dr. Martinez's assignment to assess Dr. James's water research facility had been motivated by federal concerns about the security and continued development of classified water technologies that had been protected at the Nebraska location for over 40 years under arrangements that had been appropriate during the Cold War, but were now creating potential security vulnerabilities due to changing economic conditions and the death of civilian personnel who had been essential for maintaining operational security and research progress. The specific water research facility that Dr. Martinez had been assigned to evaluate was the laboratory operation that Dr. James Chen had maintained at his family farm, where classified water security technologies worth an estimated $89 million had been developed under covert arrangements that had been established in 1975 and had continued operating successfully until Dr. James's death in 2019 had created urgent federal concerns about continued security and development of technologies that remained classified and potentially revolutionary for military water security and civilian emergency response applications. As Dr. Martinez's convoy reached the Chen property entrance, Emma could see that the federal officials were clearly responding to an emergency situation that had brought them to their remote Nebraska farm with an urgency and level of official attention that exceeded anything their family had ever experienced during decades of conventional farming operations. The convoy's professional appearance and obvious federal authority suggested that their visit was related to matters of extraordinary importance that extended far beyond typical agricultural or rural community concerns. Ms. Chen, Dr. Martinez, said as she approached Emma with the kind of professional competence and scientific authority that reflected someone who was accustomed to managing complex technical situations involving classified technologies and national security concerns. "I'm Dr. Zara Martinez from the Department of Defense Water Security Task Force. We have urgent matters to discuss regarding your grandfather's research activities and the water purification technologies that he developed at this facility over the past 4 decades. Emma looked at Dr. Martinez, recognizing the kind of federal authority and scientific expertise that suggested her family's situation had attracted attention from agencies and officials whose interest exceeded anything she could have anticipated, based on their apparent status as struggling rural farmers facing foreclosure. Despite her family's desperate financial situation and her anxiety about protecting their property during the approaching crisis, Emma's scientific curiosity and her recent discoveries about her grandfather's research made her eager to understand the federal interest in Dr. James's work. "Dr. Martinez," Emma replied, her scientific training and intellectual curiosity overcoming her surprise at the federal attention their family was receiving. I've been trying to understand my grandfather's research activities and the technologies he developed in our barn laboratory. I recently discovered that my science fair project somehow incorporated elements of his experimental work, but I don't understand the significance or potential applications of the technologies he was developing throughout his lifetime. Dr. Martinez's federal expertise and her classified knowledge about Dr. James's water security research provided her with immediate understanding of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought breakthrough water technologies to the attention of a rural teenager whose science fair project had unknowingly demonstrated classified capabilities that were decades ahead of commercially available water treatment systems. Her preliminary assessment of Emma's water purification device had confirmed federal suspicions that Dr. James's research had achieved revolutionary breakthrough results that were essential for contemporary military water security operations and civilian emergency preparedness programs. As Dr. Martinez examined Emma's science fair project and toured the barn laboratory that Dr. James had maintained throughout his lifetime, she was able to confirm that the water purification technologies developed at the Nebraska facility represented some of the most significant advances in water security research that had been achieved by any American research program during the past 50 years. The combination of Dr. James's innovative research methods, breakthrough filtration materials, and comprehensive purification systems provided water treatment capabilities that exceeded anything available through conventional commercial or military water technology programs. Ms. Chen, Dr. Martinez said, as she conducted her preliminary assessment of Dr. James's research legacy and Emma's application of his technologies. Your grandfather's water security research represents one of the most successful civilian research programs in American history. The technologies he developed could revolutionize military water security operations and civilian emergency response capabilities while providing solutions to water security challenges that are currently considered unsolvable by conventional treatment methods. Dr. Martinez's federal expertise in classified water technology assessment was revealing that Dr. James's research achievements exceeded all expectations about what civilian research operations could accomplish in rural locations with limited resources and institutional support. The quality and effectiveness of his water purification technologies suggested research capabilities that were comparable to the most advanced federal research facilities, while his innovations in filtration materials and purification processes represented breakthrough developments that could transform both military and civilian water security applications. The systematic analysis of Dr. James's water research facility that Dr. Martinez conducted during the following days exceeded all federal expectations about the scope and significance of water technologies that had been developed in rural Nebraska. The combination of Dr. James's detailed research documentation, revolutionary technological innovations, and comprehensive experimental systems provided insights into water security capabilities that had been unavailable to federal agencies despite decades of classified research programs and substantial investments in water security technology development. The emergency telephone conference that Dr. Martinez conducted with Pentagon officials at 4:45 p.m. initiated a sequence of events that would bring national security officials, water technology specialists, and federal research administrators to the Chen property with an urgency and scope that reflected the extraordinary significance of Dr. James's water security legacy. Dr. Martinez's preliminary report to her federal supervisors about the discovery of revolutionary water purification technologies had triggered emergency protocols for handling discoveries of strategic national importance. The federal response to Dr. Martinez's report began arriving at the Chen property at 7:30 a.m. the following morning, When a convoy of specialized research vehicles and federal preservation equipment approached Emma's farm with the kind of operational efficiency and security protocols that reflected the extraordinary sensitivity of technologies that required immediate expert analysis and protection from potential security threats. The convoy included Pentagon water security specialists, EPA technology assessment experts, and Army Corps of Engineers personnel whose expertise in water technology evaluation made them essential for properly assessing Dr. James's research achievements. The leader of the federal response team was Director Michael Thompson of the Pentagon's Advanced Water Security Programs Division, a 30-year veteran of military water technology research who had specialized in breakthrough water purification systems throughout his federal career. Director Thompson's preliminary briefing about the Chen property discovery had convinced him that Dr. James's water research represented one of the most significant water technology breakthroughs in recent American military history, with potential applications for military operations and civilian emergency preparedness that could transform American water security capabilities. Ms. Chen, Director Thompson said as federal specialists began establishing secure analysis facilities at Emma's property, "Your grandfather's water security research appears to represent one of the most successful civilian technology development programs in American history. The preliminary assessment that Dr. Martinez has provided suggests that Dr. James developed water purification technologies that could be invaluable for contemporary military operations and civilian emergency response applications that have been impossible due to limitations of conventional water treatment systems. The systematic analysis of Dr. James's water research achievements that federal specialists conducted during the following week exceeded all expectations about the scope and significance of technologies that had been developed at the Nebraska facility. The combination of Dr. James's innovative research methods, revolutionary technological developments, and comprehensive documentation systems provided insights into water security capabilities that revolutionized federal understanding of advanced water treatment possibilities while identifying breakthrough technologies that required immediate attention from national security agencies. The economic assessment of Dr. James's water research legacy was conducted by Dr. Patricia Williams, a senior analyst from the Pentagon's Technology Valuation Office, who specialized in determining the strategic and financial value of breakthrough technologies for federal acquisition and development programs. Dr. Williams's preliminary assessment indicated that Dr. James's water technologies were worth approximately $89 million to federal agencies, based on their revolutionary capabilities, military applications, and the costs that would be required to develop equivalent technologies through conventional federal research programs. Ms. Chen, Dr. Williams explained during her briefing about the strategic value of Dr. James's research, water purification technologies of this revolutionary capability and practical applicability are extraordinarily rare and valuable for federal agencies that need breakthrough solutions for military water security and civilian emergency preparedness applications. The comprehensive nature and exceptional effectiveness of your grandfather's technologies makes them invaluable for contemporary military operations and strategic planning that depends on reliable water security capabilities in hostile environments and emergency situations. The federal government's compensation offer for acquiring Dr. James's water research technologies was presented to Emma Chen on September 15, 2024, by Director Thompson and Dr. Williams, who explained that the Pentagon and the EPA were authorized to provide immediate compensation of $45 million for exclusive federal access to Dr. James's technologies. followed by annual research collaboration fees of $8.2 million for Emma's participation in ongoing technology development and research projects that would require her assistance and continued involvement with the water security research programs. Ms. Chen, Director Thompson explained, the water security technologies that your grandfather developed represent federal assets that are essential for America's military capabilities and civilian emergency preparedness planning. The federal government's compensation reflects both the extraordinary value of these technologies and our appreciation for your family's contribution to American water security research and national defense capabilities. But the compensation from federal agencies was only the beginning of Emma's economic and educational transformation. The discovery of Dr. James's water research achievements had attracted the attention of MIT, Stanford, Caltech, and major defense contractors, whose researchers and engineers were eager to access water technologies that could revolutionize military operations and civilian water security applications while providing educational and career opportunities for the young woman whose science fair project had demonstrated practical applications of revolutionary federal technologies. The full scholarship offer that Emma received from MIT on September 22, 2024, included not only complete undergraduate and graduate education funding, but also guaranteed admission to their environmental engineering doctoral program with full research assistantship and access to advanced water technology research facilities that would enable her to continue developing the breakthrough technologies that her grandfather had pioneered. The MIT offer represented the complete reversal of the college rejection that had seemed to destroy Emma's educational dreams just months earlier. "Emma," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, MIT's Director of Environmental Engineering Admissions, during her personal visit to the Chen farm, "your practical application of advanced water purification technologies and your family's contribution to water security research makes you exactly the kind of innovative student that our program is designed to support. Your grandfather's research legacy and your demonstrated ability to apply breakthrough technologies for practical problem-solving represents the combination of theoretical knowledge and practical innovation that environmental engineering requires for addressing contemporary water security challenges." The licensing agreements that Emma signed with federal agencies and research institutions not only provided immediate resolution to her family's financial crisis, but established the Chen property as a permanent federal water security research facility that would be supported by government funding while remaining under her family's ownership and management. The agreements included provisions for Emma's education funding, her mother's financial security, and career opportunities that ensured their agricultural heritage would be preserved while their family's economic future was permanently established. Through their contribution to American water security research, the transformation of the Chen property from struggling family farm to federal water security research facility attracted national media attention that highlighted both the extraordinary technological discovery and Emma's inspiring story of science, fair humiliation, transformed into scientific recognition and national service. Emma's interviews with major news networks emphasized her amazement at Dr. James's hidden research legacy, while expressing gratitude for federal recognition and compensation that had saved not only their farm, but provided opportunities for contributing to American water security capabilities and technological advancement. Dr. Martinez's role in recognizing and facilitating the discovery of Dr. James's water research legacy led to her promotion to Deputy Director of Military Water Security Programs and her assignment as Director of the James Chen Water Technology Research Institute, which was established at the Chen property to continue development of breakthrough water technologies and coordinate research into military water security and civilian emergency preparedness capabilities. Dr. Martinez's expertise and her personal connection to the discovery made her the ideal candidate for leading ongoing research that would require years of detailed technology development and security assessment. The James Chen Water Technology Research Institute became one of America's premier facilities for water security research and military technology development, attracting researchers and engineers from universities and defense contractors throughout the world who were interested in studying breakthrough water purification technologies and developing advanced applications for military operations and civilian emergency preparedness. The Institute's research programs provided new capabilities for military water security and civilian infrastructure protection that influenced contemporary defense policies and strategic planning. 3 months after the discovery of Dr. James's water research legacy, Emma Chen was invited to Washington, D.C., where she received the Presidential Medal of Science from President Biden in recognition of her family's extraordinary contribution to American water security research and technological advancement capabilities. The ceremony, attended by senior officials from multiple federal agencies and defense organizations, honored not only Dr. James's water security research, but also Emma's scientific achievements and her cooperation with ongoing research that was providing valuable capabilities for American military operations and civilian water security. Ms. Chen, said President Biden during the awards ceremony, your grandfather's water security research and your family's cooperation with our technology development efforts represent the best traditions of American scientific innovation and public service. The technologies that Dr. James developed have provided our military forces with water security capabilities that are essential for America's defense operations and the water treatment innovations that our civilian emergency preparedness depends upon. The financial transformation of Emma's situation exceeded her most optimistic dreams about resolving her family's farming crisis and building economic security. The immediate compensation of $45 million from federal agencies, combined with annual research collaboration fees, educational trust funds, and technology licensing agreements, provided economic security that would support not only her current needs, but also agricultural preservation and educational opportunities for future generations, while ensuring that the Chen property would remain in family ownership for decades to come. Emma's decision to establish the Dr. James Chen Memorial Water Security Scholarship Program using a portion of her federal compensation created educational opportunities for students interested in pursuing careers in environmental engineering, water technology research, and national defense applications. The scholarship program provided educational support for young people from agricultural communities, while supporting research into water security technologies and environmental engineering techniques that continued Dr. James's legacy of contributing to American technological advancement and national security. The ongoing research at the James Chen Water Technology Research Institute continued to reveal new applications for Dr. James's breakthrough water technologies that influenced contemporary military operations and civilian emergency preparedness policies. The detailed development of Dr. James's purification systems provided capabilities for military water security and civilian infrastructure protection that remained essential for understanding contemporary water treatment opportunities and developing effective approaches to water security challenges. The science fair redemption that Emma experienced 6 months after her original humiliation came when she was invited to present her water purification research at the International Science and Engineering Fair, where her demonstration of breakthrough water technologies received the grand prize and recognition as the most significant technological innovation by a high school student in the competition's history. The judges, who had previously dismissed her work as simple farm girl engineering, publicly apologized and acknowledged that Emma's research represented revolutionary advances in water security technology that exceeded anything they had previously encountered in student research competitions. "Emma," said Dr. Robert Anderson, the chief judge who had originally dismissed her project, "your water purification technologies represent the most significant breakthrough in environmental engineering that we have seen in decades of science. Fair evaluation, your practical application of advanced water treatment concepts, and your family's contribution to water security research demonstrates the kind of innovative thinking that science education is designed to encourage and support." The college recruitment that followed Emma's science fair triumph included scholarship offers from every major university in the United States, with MIT, Stanford, Caltech, and a dozen other institutions competing to provide educational opportunities. For the young woman whose scientific achievements had attracted national attention and federal recognition, the transformation from college rejection to competitive recruitment represented one of the most dramatic reversals in academic history and demonstrated how revolutionary discoveries could completely change educational and career opportunities. The agricultural preservation program that Emma established at their family farm ensured that the Chen property would continue operating as both an active farming operation and a federal research facility, proving that technological innovation and traditional agriculture could coexist while supporting both family heritage and national security research. The farming demonstration programs that Emma developed provided models for sustainable agriculture while maintaining the rural character that had made their property ideal for covert research operations throughout Dr. James's lifetime. 2 years after the discovery of Dr. James's water research legacy, the Chen property had become an internationally recognized center for water security technology research and environmental engineering education, hosting conferences and research programs that attracted scientists and engineers from universities and government agencies throughout the world. The Institute's technological contributions had influenced academic understanding of water security while providing practical innovations that enhanced contemporary military capabilities and civilian emergency preparedness. The transformation of Emma Chen's life, from humiliated science fair participant to nationally recognized water technology researcher, represented one of the most inspiring personal reversals in recent American scientific history. But Emma's response to her changed circumstances reflected the values and perspectives that had been shaped by generations of farming families who understood that extraordinary opportunities carried responsibilities to family, community, and national service that exceeded personal achievement and recognition. The story of how a dismissed science fair project led to the discovery of water technologies worth $89 million became legendary throughout the scientific community and agricultural regions, inspiring other students to investigate their own family histories, while demonstrating how individual research efforts and federal cooperation could contribute to national security and technological advancement in ways that exceeded anyone's expectations about the potential value of rural innovation and family research traditions. America's military training programs now include curriculum about the James Chen discovery as an example of how civilian research and federal technology development contributed to American water security capabilities while maintaining operational secrecy and community integration. The story serves as inspiration for military engineers while demonstrating the importance of long-term research planning and understanding the complex legacies that civilian technology development has contributed to American defense capabilities and technological advancement. Today, the Chen property continues to operate as both an active water technology research facility and a working demonstration of agricultural heritage preservation, proving that scientific research and contemporary military technology development can coexist with family values and rural community connections. The Chen family's story provides a model for how extraordinary discoveries can be transformed into opportunities that benefit not only individual families, but contribute to national security and technological advancement. The legacy of Dr. James Chen's water security research and the discovery of his revolutionary technologies continues to influence America's understanding of military water security capabilities and civilian contributions to defense technology development. While the Chen family's cooperation with federal research demonstrates how individual citizens can contribute to protecting America's interests while preserving their family heritage and community connections. In the end, the story of how Emma Chen's science fair humiliation led to the discovery of her grandfather's extraordinary water security legacy proves that sometimes our greatest disappointments create the circumstances that reveal our most valuable assets, and that the combination of family research traditions, scientific curiosity, and federal cooperation can unlock technologies that exceed our most optimistic dreams, while contributing to causes that benefit entire nations and future generations. The science fair judges who had dismissed Emma's simple farm girl engineering instead became witnesses to the discovery of revolutionary water technologies that would secure her family's future, while revealing that their ordinary barn laboratory had been home to one of America's most important water security research operations, whose hidden contributions to national defense would finally receive the recognition and federal support that Dr. James Chen's extraordinary research had deserved for over 4 decades. What family secrets might be waiting in your inherited property? Like and subscribe for more incredible discovery stories that prove ordinary families can make extraordinary contributions to their communities and their nation's security. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.